Hello YouTube. So part 2 of the AlphaDestiny Novice Program review today, and we're going to read the FAQ. And if you watched the previous video, which I think you should, you know that I made a mistake. I thought it was only 2 times a week, or at least that's how it transpired in my critique. It's not, it's 3 times a week, which to me makes the program much better. So, how often do you follow the program? Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I think that's really good because you get your weekends, and for novices, it's very important. And you, of course, alternate between the workouts. So you do ABA, BAB. That's a good way to approach training for novices because it's simple. How long should you rest between sets? He gives the general guideline of 2 to 5 minutes. That's good. When asked, can you modify the program, he says no unless indicated by his own sources, whether he says that you should change something or not. I'm not against that. I understand novices need to be babied a bit. When am I intermediate? So he has his own standards for that I disagree with, but I think they're reasonable. As far as lifting standards go, they're reasonable. How do I make progress? He explains his rep scheme and set scheme, which I agree with, so I'm not going to go over that. He basically explains how the volume and the intensity undulates based on how many sets and reps you do, which novices might not realize they're doing, but yeah, it's volume manipulation basically. It's very simple. It's a proof that volume manipulation is very simple. What do I do when I store? That's interesting because a lot of people don't know what to do when they store, and your approach on it is very important. He says to identify the exercise you're stalling in, then you take 10% off of that exercise and you build back from there. And he says that recovering is important and that the closer you get to intermediate, the more plateaus you get. Which I disagree with. I think the reason why people plateau more and more until they become intermediate is because the programs they're running is not properly written. For me, he's missing a step. Yes, you should reduce the weight, but not just reduce the weight, you should also increase the volume. It's going to increase your tonnage and eventually it's going to lead to progress again. So that's an issue I have with that. What if I'm intermediate on my upper body, not the lower body? Well, he says that you should run another program that I might review later. It's his intermediate program, hybrid program. I would say just work the part of the body that's lagging. Do I go to failure? You should avoid going to failure. Depending on what you mean by failure, I might disagree with it. For me, going to failure is failing. If you fail lifts, then it's bad. But if you always manage to get that one rep, that if you did another rep, it would be a failure, a technical or actual failure, then you're, in my opinion, still going to failure. You're not failing. And in my opinion, that's the best. That's what you should be doing. You should always be that close to failing, as long as form stays clean. Should I book or cut? It really depends where you stand. The truth is that novice lifters can recomp fairly easily. Yes, if you're novice, you shouldn't care too much unless you're really fat or really skinny. And he says you need to learn basic dieting. That's really good. If I'm cutting, can I change anything in the program? He's basically telling you to cut the volume, which I have no experience with cutting, so I'm not going to say anything about it. Is this a powerlifting program? He says no, it's a drug-free recreational lifter program. And in his own way, that's why he justifies using trap bar deadlifts and box squats with it. I personally disagree with it. I don't think that these lifts are better for recreational lifters. They're easier. But you can be a recreational lifter who's very serious about bodybuilding, for example. And in that case, you should maybe do something besides box squats and trap bar deadlift. And the issue in the previous video I said is also the box squat is not really a proper knee flexion for multiple reasons. The stance is too wide, the way the people rock on the box is not a squat anymore. There are things that I disagree with here. What equipment do you recommend? No belt, so he says no belt, no wrist straps, no knee sleeves. And he says the only item I will accept are wrist straps for benching. I don't like that. Use what you want. I mean, I don't use a belt. I've never used a belt, but if you like belts, use belts. Who cares? As long as you're not using equipment that modifies the strength curve of the lift, knock yourself out. If it helps your recovery, if it makes you stronger, do it. I start having issues with wraps and like all of the stuff that really gives you a lot of poundage, like slingshots. These need to be thought about, and novices shouldn't use them. But equipment that helps you recover, you should use. Can I do one rep maxes? No, never. Okay, it's the way he writes his program. I never do one rep maxes either. Can I do exercises with bands or chains? He says no. Straight weight. I use straight weight too. I don't use bands or chains, so I get that. Can I free squat instead of box squat? If you don't have a box to sit on, he says yes. Otherwise, squat off a box. And his reasoning is it allows you to recover better than a free squat, which I disagree with. Gives you less knee pain, I disagree with. Develop explosiveness, I disagree with. Provide immediate deadlift carryover, I agree. And strengthen the posterior chain like you've never seen before. Yes, because you put a ton of strain on it, which doesn't go hand in hand with the recovery part. I think a lot of people use too much lower back on the box squat because they rock on the box, and when they come back, they good morning the weight up, which is not a squat. And yes, it's going to deload the knees because you go so wide that you barely use your quads. From what I've seen though, it can lead to knee injuries. Why? Because you're walking through a range of motion that puts a lot of stress on the knee. So it might be something that creates imbalances that are going to eventually lead to knee pain. Explosiveness, I mean, people argue that they're better for athletes. I'm not going to argue against or for that. But as far as being explosive through a full range of motion, doing a lift that cuts the range of motion is of course going to be subpar. As far as athletic proponents of the lift, I don't know. I've never used box squat playing basketball or football, so I don't know. And I agree that it carries over to the deadlift. Why? Because you are pushing the weight usually at the level where your hip would be when you pull the weight off the floor. So of course it's going to carry over. But I think the development you're going to get in your quads is not going to be maximized. And same for the glutes. I think that doing a full range of motion squat is better. And also if you only learn to squat from a box, the day you do free squats, you're going to be very surprised because they don't carry over as much as people think. How do I box squat? He explains how to box squat. Do I squat with a low bar or high bar style? And what about the foot stance? He says high bar, which same thing, you squat the way you want to squat. If you like low bar, do low bar. And for the foot stance, he says on the wider side. So high bar, wide stance, box squats, which is as far as a proper squat as you could go. I really don't like that. He says it gives you better leverages, yes, but you're trying to train the leg, you're not trying to train the hip that much. I'm not a big fan. Can you do front squats? He says, yes, you can when you're a late novice. I love front squats. I don't like them for novices because they're very technical. Can I squat in the Smith machine? Never. Very good. I agree. Never squat in the Smith machine. Why floor press? He says that you already do enough with overhead press, close grip bench press, and overhead extensions, but overhead extensions don't really train the horizontal press. Same for overhead press. They carry over, but they're not an horizontal press. So you need to have, in my opinion, several instances of horizontal presses as a novice. Can be push-ups, dips, or bench, but it needs to be there. And for me, the floor press is not needed for novices. What about the upper chest? He says, don't worry about the upper chest. I agree. You're a novice lifter. Don't worry about your upper chest. I find that doing normal bench press works well for the upper chest. Where do I pose on the overhead press? Of the chest collarbone area. Yeah. If you can go all the way, yeah. Some people like to go around the chin or something like this. I like full range of motion. I understand some people don't. Do I have to do overhead extensions? He said you should. And then he says, well, okay, overhead extensions, and then he says you should do them because of the long head, which I agree. Then he says don't do, he says standard skull crushers don't work the long head. I agree, because most people don't do the skull crushers properly. They have no elbow, they have no shoulder flexion in there. So he wants you to do overhead. My issue with overhead extensions is that it can create elbow pain, so novices should be careful. Can you do extensions with dumbbells? He says sure, but I prefer you use a bar. But he says if you have elbow pain, do dumbbells, so we agree. Can I replace extensions for weighted dips? No, of course. Can I add trap exercises to the program? He says no, your traps will grow just fine from heavy deadlifts and rows. When you're a novice, I agree. Past the novice phase, absolutely not, but we're talking about AlphaDestiny. He knows that you need trap work. Well, fine. What if I can't do weighted chin-ups? He says just do them normally with body weight, which I think should be the guideline for everyone. I don't have a trap bar, no what? You should do conventional, I agree. Low or high end door for the trap bar. They're not the same thing, but yeah, you're using a trap bar, use both and see where you stand. What about the behind the back deadlift? No, conventional is a better choice, I agree. I don't like the hack deadlift at all. What about sumo deadlift? He says it's not his number one choice, and I understand why, because he already has people box squat with a wide stance, so it's sort of redundant. But he says you should do it if you want to do it, and I agree. But you should also adapt. So if you do deadlifts, if you do sumo deadlifts, you should be doing close stance high bar squats without the box, in my opinion. What about Jefferson deadlift? He says he doesn't advise it, and I agree. It's not something novices should do, in my opinion. What about snatch rep deadlift? He says no, but not for the right reasons. He says too taxing on recovery. Well, that depends on your leverages, on the weight you lift, on the set and rep range. For me, the answer should be no, because you're a novice, and snatch grip deadlifts are fairly technical, and you don't need them. Deficit deadlift, no. I love deficit deadlifts for novices. It really teaches them to push with their legs, and it's very important. So I disagree with that. What about pulling off blocks? He says if you have lower back issues. I agree. I also think, but he knows that because he understood that later on in his training career. It can be a good way to deload and still have the lifter do pulls, so you can have them pull more than once a week or twice a week. But for novices, it's not necessary. Can you replace rack pulls? Can you replace deadlift by rack pulls? He says only if you have to. I agree. Good mornings or stiff leg deadlifts? He said they both work fine, and you should pick the one that you can do safely. I agree with that. Reverse hypers. He says, yes, do reverse hypers, I agree. Slapping a few sets of reverse hypers or hyperextensions at the end of the program doesn't hurt. If my shoulders hurt, can I do extra work for them? Yes, he says yes. He doesn't really explain what you should be doing. In my opinion, you should be doing face pulls. Whereas the ab exercise, he says weighted planks is enough, and since you do everything beltless, it's enough. I agree. One ab isolation exercise plus compound movements is enough for novices. Do I have to do weighted planks? He says yes, you can do angling leg raises, you can do crunches, so he understands that you can be doing something else, which is good. Should I do anything on my off days like GPP? No GPP. I agree. 3 days a week for novices with that amount of training is enough. Can you do it twice a week and still make gains? He says yes, but you will make less gains. Understands. I don't want chicken calves or a pencil neck. Can I train them at the end of the program? He says yes. Good. Can I add additional forearm work? No, that's overkill. I disagree. I think novices should get a taste for isolation movements. That includes direct forearm work. Yeah, your forearms are going to work as a novice from doing pull-ups and pulls, but you should do some armor curls or something. Just to get used to it, basically. Does this program really work? No, he just wrote it for fun. Yes, it works. It's a good program, it's written effectively. Anything works for novices, and the way he's written it is actually good. So yes, it will work. So that's it for the FAQ. For the AlphaDestiny Novice Program, I reviewed the program, I reviewed his mentality around the program. So if you have any questions surrounding that, please let me know, and I will answer. Have a good day.